You're listening to the Farm D podcast, the pod to lead you through agricultural risk management stories, practices, and tips.
Hello and welcome to the sixth episode of the Farm D podcast series. I am Anaïs Petitjean and today we will discuss about climate change and rural farmers' resilience. The effects of climate change are already being felt in agricultural systems and will further exacerbate agricultural risks with increasing frequency, intensity, and unpredictability impacting the lives of smallholder farmers. Within this context, it is crucial to support rural farmers with tools that can strengthen their capacity to adapt, mitigate, and cope with the effects of climate change. Through the case study of Tunisia, we discussed the subject with Samar Zaidi. She is the responsible for strengthening the agro-economic services of professional agricultural organizations at the Union of Agricultural Producers International Development in Tunisia, and she's also the member of the Rural Economics Laboratory at the National Institute of Agronomic Research of Tunisia. Hello, Samar.
Hello, Anaïs.
As an expert of Mediterranean areas, according to you, what is the state of farming systems in that specific region?
Thank you for the invitation, Anaïs. I am a researcher in the Tunisian area, okay? So let's just talk in the Tunisian area. I will start by introducing or talking about the importance of the agricultural sector in Tunisia. The agricultural sector is a major contributor to the Tunisian economy in terms of job creation and the stabilization of the trade balance, in addition to its role in ensuring the country's food security. So this sector is occupying more than 62% of the total land area of the country, amounting to 10 million hectares, including 4.9 million hectares of arable land. It employed 15% of the active population and contributed to 10% of the GDP and 11% of exports. Those information is to say why the agricultural sector is important in Tunisia and why today we are talking about this sector. That sector is facing a lot of challenges, and the major challenge today is the climate change.
And speaking of climate change, can you explain how climate change directly impacts smallholder farmers' livelihoods, giving precise examples?
Okay, so I will start by the impact of climate change in general in Tunisia. So if we examine the maps depicting the evolution of aridity in Tunisian territory from 1971 to projections for 2040, a clear trend emerges. The migration of drought towards the north is increasingly noticeable, indicating a stronger tendency towards aridity, and the shift in bioclimatic zones with arid and hyper-arid zones moving northward is evident, accompanied by the expansion of, say, the Saharan zone, of the near disappearance of the human zone. So this is previous transformation that will escalate further endless intervention data places, and also that will influence two vital factors for agricultural production, namely temperature and precipitation. And according to forecasts, by 2050, the annual volume of precipitation is expected to decrease by 2 to 14% across the entire territory in Tunisia, compared to the 1961 and the 1990 period. And for the temperature, the average annual temperature is projected to increase by 1.2 to 2.3 degrees, depending on the region in Tunisia, compared to the average calculated over the 1961 and 1990 period. So this increase will have a direct impact on the agricultural sector. potentially leading to crop losses and food insecurity. And if we have a look under the fourth IPCC report, the interior areas remain more vulnerable to climate change compared to the coastal zones in terms of two mentioned parameters. Challenging climatic conditions will negatively impact this area, with rising temperatures and drought likely causing the disappearance of cereal cultivation areas and the decrease in herds of cattle, sheep, and goats, especially in the central and southern regions of the countries. And a lot of studies can confirm what I'm saying. So this will result in reduced crop yields, income from exports and food shortages, and agricultural households are expected to experience a decline in agricultural income ranging from 2 to 7% per year between 2000 and 23. So in this context, agricultural households are increasingly facing food insecurity and being affected by the negative impact of climate change.
What are the tools to strengthen rural farmers' resilience?
So, if we ask the question now, what we have to do to face or fight the negative impact of climate change, here we have two options, mitigation or adaptation. So the mitigation means that we have to act on the causes of climate change. So acting on the root causes involves technical measures to reduce the hazards of climate change. So here, a courageous call to alarm is needed in the face of a global economic system that has depleted the planet. Countries emitting significant amounts of CO2 must assume responsibility, shifting the burden away from those merely consuming these emissions. And the second act, or in the second hand, we can talk about adaptation. It means we can act on the consequences of the climate change. So we have to accept climate change as a reality with its negative impacts that becoming increasingly apparent and underscores the need of adaptation. So a fundamental transformation of societies, communities, various systems and individuals is essential to respond appropriately to climate change. So, and that will let us achieving resilience. Resilience is the key with the cost not borne by the poor and vulnerable populations. The most affected communities should have a say in determining what is best for them, and the direction towards which they inspire. The involvement in decision-making processes is crucial. So I will explain a study that we did here in Tunisia. So we our study focused on two governorates in central Tunisia, in arid region. Those two governorates are Zagouan, located in northeast of Tunisia, and Kairouan, located in central west of Tunisia. So a household questionnaire has been conceived. We worked with 700 smallholder farmers in the two governorates, and we used the analytical framework based on the analysis of the resilience of agricultural households to climate change. We used the RIMA model designed by the FAO, and this model was tested in several countries like Nicaragua, Burkina Faso, Uganda, Mali, and me and my team, we tested this tool here in Tunisia. So the applied framework of resilience measurement index provided a deep understanding of resiliency of farm households to food insecurity and their determinants. So moreover, we identified a standard framework for assessing the resiliency of households to cope with shocks related to drought. In addition, considering the main differences between farm households in less and more resilient, and identifying effective effective factor in contributing to household resilience. So in this analysis, we try to provide an opportunity for policymakers in detecting gaps and developing adaptation strategies, as well as focused interventions among the vulnerable farm households. So here, our main finding showed a constraint to apply agricultural adaptation strategies in dry land area were identified to be related to a lack of knowledge, expertise, and data on climate change issues. Furthermore, we note a lack of specific climate change institutions dealing with climate change issues and the need for a better institutional framework in which to implement adaptation in this direction. So if we want to enhance the capacity of rural populations to face climate change, policy interventions should increase the knowledge of farm households about the risks of climate change on their food security and the different coping strategies that have been applied to face harsh climatic conditions. In this study, we proposed some policies as creating opportunities for off-farm income generating activities, especially for youth and women, that should be included in any program and policy intervention in the vulnerable areas. Also, supporting small farmers to improve their income by facilitating access to credit and creating local markets closest to agricultural households to improve their marketing strategies. Another proposal is to regrouping small farmers in agricultural associations that could play an important role to providing financial support to poor farms households by ensuring a simple and attractive credit system, enabling families to purchase essential household and food items. Also implementing programs like drought preparedness plan, soil erosion and water harvesting plan, etc., that targets the farmers' knowledge on how to face climate change difficulties in the possible way. Also, agro-ecological practices have been proposed as promising tools for climate change adaptation, and the agro-ecological approach addresses to agro-environmental problems through a holistic perspective, which is necessary to tackle the multidimensional challenges of agriculture and their global change. And when we talk about agroecology, we are not only referring to practices that respect the environment and enable the production of agricultural goods in harmony with nature, but specifically agroecology empowers farmers to regain control on the work process, enabling them to make decisions about their agricultural practices and reduce dependence on inputs and external capital groups. So by adopting agroecological practices, farmers can decrease reliance on synthetic inputs such as fertilizers and pesticides, focusing instead on ecological processes and natural resources. So this autonomy and control over agricultural systems contribute to reducing external dependency. So agroecology promote the exchange of knowledge and collaboration among farmers, allowing them to share experiences, innovation, and best practices. So this strengthens their collective action capacity and decision-making power, fostering a cooperative environment that benefits the agricultural community.
Yes, and can you also talk a bit about the impact of climate change on rural women?
Yes. So if we talk about rural women in Tunisia, we are talking about the 50.4% of the rural population. So that population, I mean women or rural women, are indispensable development actors. So they significantly contribute to the promotion of sustainable agriculture and play a strategic role in food security, as well as in safeguarding rural areas against environmental and human desertification. So they constitute 70% of the agricultural workforce, 80% of the forestry workforce, but their professional status remains so fragile. Rural women also represents only 15% of the permanent workforce and only only 6% of the number of agricultural operators. They are most affected by poverty, and statistics say that 20% of rural women have their own sources of income compared to 60% of men. All this figures indicate that rural women are more vulnerable to climate change simply because they are women, just because they have two X chromosomes. As a result, they are less resilient to climate change, highlighting the need for increasingly gender-focused efforts. So it requires gender-specific analysis to develop solutions specifically tailored for women.
Thank you. And to conclude this podcast, is there any additional message you would like to pass?
Finally, I just want to say that climate change is indeed a global phenomenon, but we do not all share the same responsibility or the same degree of involvement. There are countries that pollute, produce, and emit more greenhouse gases, while others consume and bear the consequences. In Tunisia, for example, we are responsible for 0.07% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And the entire African continent, comprising 55 countries, contributes by only 3% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. Yet, reports from various organizations working on climate change consistently highlight Africa as one of the regions most affected by the impact of climate change, like droughts, floods, crop losses, and most significantly, forced internal and external migration. And we all know that migration is now a challenging issue for governments in the majority of northern countries. It seems as if they are saying we have the right to destroy the planet and make you suffer from consequences of our choices and policies, but you, the vulnerable one, are not welcome in our countries. You must stay at home and accept the famine, the thirst, the lack of job opportunities, or health problems. They are victims, and they are not welcome to travel to find a better future. And according to the World Bank, by 2050, climate-related factors could force up to 32 million people to migrate within their countries in West Africa alone. And this is not accounting for the entire continent. So the impact is really dangerous. So therefore, all these severe manifestations of nature, this anger of the planet expressed through natural disasters worldwide, are the nature's way of saying stop to the current international economic and political system. This system has depleted our resources, triggered economic crisis, caused social upheaval, significant disparities, conflicts, and wars. So if we want to survive, we must change. We must consider a new economic and developmental model. And in the meantime, we must work on strengthening the capacities of the less privileged classes, the poor countries or developing nations, to cope with the impact of climate change by improving education and health systems and investing in developing or development projects. So finally, we all belong to this earth. It's our home. If we want to overcome the impact of climate change, we must all unite to fight against the causes, the fight against the system who is the main driver of these causes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Samar.
Thank you, Anaïs.
That brings us to the end of the 6th episode of the FarmD podcast series. Thank you for listening and stay tuned in our community of practice at cop.farm-d.org for more stories about agricultural risk management. Goodbye.